You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
J.T. Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Hobb,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Deborah Burns,
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories. We've got a fantastic show for you today. But before we get started, I'd like to tell you about some sponsors. Jeff Sweat and his new book, Mayfly. It's actually a duology that's out now. You can join in the Mayfly quest at mayflybook.com. Start your journey. Long ago, a mysterious plague hit the city of L.A., decimating the population. Only children were immune. Ever since, no one lives past 17, and no one knows why. There are clues all over the city. Only the most determined will recognize them, and only the cleverest will be able to solve them. Life is short. Can you outlive it? Go to mayflybook.com to join the Mayfly quest today. And thanks to our friend Ernie Lindsay for sponsoring the show. His Sarah, the complete series, is on sale now. There's a link to it in the show notes. In Sarah, the complete series, a peaceful but hectic life is shattered for a mother and her children, along with her friends and colleagues, by kidnapping, murder, and vengeance. Those seeking retribution will go to any lengths. This bargain price collection contains over 600 pages of thrilling suspense, which includes all 3 novels in the Sarah series and the companion novella. Sarah, the complete series by Ernie Lindsay. Now stay tuned for the show. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Deborah Burns on the show with me today. Deborah has a fantastic new book called Saturday's Child, A Daughter's Memoir. When you're hearing this, it has been out for a couple of days now, and it's available in paperback and Kindle edition, anywhere that you buy fine books. Welcome to the show, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Hank. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you. Before we get into talking about your amazing career and the new book and all of that good stuff, we begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
My first memory of it is actually reading the Sunday Funnies, as funny as that may sound. When I was growing up, Brenda Starr was a comic strip, and she was also my mother's doppelganger. I didn't realize then all that was working probably on my subconscious at the time. But I think Brenda was a way of channeling both my mother and my own talents. And I felt I was going to grow up and be that adventurous reporter. And it really took me down a path with journalism first. There was always a little nagging something in the back of my mind that I had a story to tell, whether it would be a novel or something else. But I chased the writing dream on the journalism front, and that is my earliest memory.
I love that so much. I love that so much. I'm always fascinated by people that are drawn to journalism, and then from journalism do other types of writing. What was, other than the comic strip, what was it about journalism that really drew you in, when you started realizing what that entails and what a journalist means to the world? What was it that grabbed your attention and made you want to pursue that?
Well, I felt as if it spoke to some innate intuitiveness that I had and have always had for people and situations. It might have been heightened because I was always trying to figure my mother out. So whatever natural ability I had was kind of honed razor sharp at her feet. But I always felt as if I had in my nature the ability to get to the essence of things. And I felt that being in a career where I was behind the news and trying to get at what the real story was just kind of second nature to me. So I think that's why it pulled me in. And when I was actually writing this story, I had to put the pen in another hand, because the essence of journalism, and then later on my own marketing career on the business side of publishing, is really to get to the headline or get to the compelling tagline or marketing line that makes other people say, oh, I get that. That's a story that I want to learn more about. And so that's what journalism trains you to do. Find your lead. What's most important. And when you're writing a memoir, it's about unfolding the story for the reader and taking the reader along. So it's the exact opposite of how I was trained. And that part of it always makes me smile.
Do you feel like journalism teaches you or allows you to see the world a little differently than everybody else does? And I understand what you mean about looking for the lead, looking for the thing that not everyone else sees, because that's why we read more in depth about certain situations, because we want to get someone else's perspective. We want to see the thing that we didn't see. Does journalism allow you to do that?
Well, I think to be a journalist, you have to be an observer. And that's the same really for all writers. We're all kind of watching and silently listening to what's going on around us. And it's part of how we're wired or built. I was trained in journalism. It was a time where journalists, it was almost like a Hippocratic oath. You did not insert your own perspective or opinion into the story. That was anathema. That was the opposite of what journalism was. Your job was to observe the story, maybe to your point, Hank, a little differently than other people would, but then to report on it and try to get as close to the truth of the story as possible. And I think that training, that's why I remain to this day kind of an independent. I can never align fully with one side or the other, because I know the truth is always somewhere in that middle. And that's what I believe journalists have to strive to achieve. And sometimes when I watch the news on either side today, it's amazing to me how the journalist's opinion is kind of what leads the way.
We've strayed from those early days, haven't we?
We have strayed, yes. We've gone astray.
You also mentioned your time in marketing. Marketing is storytelling of a different fashion, and we don't always look at it that way, but we're trying to communicate a lot of times on a deeply human level, and a lot of times it's kind of crass. We're peddling product, but we're doing that through communicating with people on something that hopefully connects with them deeply. Do you find that thread in marketing to be true?
Well, for sure, because marketing, to your point and question, is a different kind of storytelling, but it's storytelling that is trying to resonate with either something universal that everybody feels in their daily lives, or that solves a problem. And really, it's not necessarily or, it's and or. So the marketing, the good part of marketing, there's a lot of bad in marketing, but the good part in marketing is that a problem exists that needs a solution. And you're going to try to present that in this very disrupted, cluttered, over-messaged world to make people's lives just a little bit better. And of course, it depends on the product that you're selling and so on. I always used marketing in the magazine world. And I worked on a lot of different brands that, if we're not reading today, most people are familiar with. And we believed when we were talking to advertisers about marketing and being with us and reaching our readers, that we were really helping to solve some, maybe not existential crisis, but some problem for our readers. And that's what made magazines great when magazines were great, whether it was Elle or Woman's Day or Elle Decor and Metropolitan Home in the world of interiors. We were there to inspire and, through the marketing, help people with what they were searching for.
You mentioned earlier that part of the draw for you with journalism was to try to connect with your mother and understand her more. The book Saturday's Child is about your relationship with your mother and then that journey with you. Tell us about your mother. What did she do, and was she this larger than life figure to you?
She was larger than life. She was a goddess on a pedestal, and I danced around her my whole life. I'm an only child, and my mother was my focal point and really my obsession when I was young, because she was elusive. And I idealized her because she was this persona that everyone wanted to be with. And she was worshipped in my own household and by everyone in her community. And there's a line early on in the book where I note that she seduced the world, and I was no exception. And so that kind of early devotion is very life-shaping. And the fact that I had to chase her because she was sort of like a VIP guest in our household. She came and went and constructed a life where she was free of the day-to-day. And she orchestrated my father's two unmarried spinster older sisters to come live with us. And they took care of me. And the book's name comes from the fact that I saw her mostly on Saturdays. Plus, I was born on a Saturday, and that old nursery rhyme, Saturday's child works hard for a living, really applies to me because my perception was that I had to work hard for her love.
You've starting in journalism, then into marketing, working in the magazine world. What was it that that stirred you to start pursuing this story, when you had worked on such, big projects and, things with a global audience and, things with interest to a wide, broad range? What then makes you turn inward to start looking at your own story and then, and how did the memoir project start unfolding for you?
Well, there's a few directions to the answer because that really is a big question. So I'm going to try, if I forget a point along the way.
Well, and I ask hugely complicated questions, so I apologize.
It's got a few different pieces in it.
Yes, it does. I'm sorry.
That's what I love about this show, though. So I'm in. I'm going to answer it. The people in that magazine publishing network are surprised, cheering me on, but surprised because no one really knew that underneath this business executive who was fielding all of these things was really a writer's heart quietly beating. So no one knew that I had this story to tell in those days. But the second part of the answer is kind of the why now of this story. And I think that the top line answer, the lead of that answer is chaos, in a word. My mother had gotten breast cancer when she was 56 and died after that. And it was a lingering kind of slow decline. And I was still relatively young, and her loss, the loss of this object of my affection, was enormous for me to handle. And even though she's now been gone just more than 25 years, she was always present, kind of maybe in a little room very close to that quietly beating writer's heart. She was there. And I always thought of her. You know, you hear people say, not a day goes by and I don't. Well, truly, she was always, I didn't always talk about it, but she was always in me. And at a time when my life was changing, here's the chaos part. The magazine world, as many people in publishing, any side of publishing knows, is in chaos itself. It kind of looked its digital future in the eye and didn't know what to say next. And everything has toppled and is being re-envisioned, and the big problem is that no one can find what the revenue model is in this new world. And so at the time, I was chief innovation officer of this global company trying to reinvent its future and hang on. And I knew that it couldn't last long. And I knew that I was going to have to reinvent my life. And I was pretty good at that. I had a lot of very different roles within that publishing company, and seemed to have a little bit of a knack for flexibility and taking on like a new challenge. So I knew that I was going to have to do something in a big way again, because the company was probably going to be sold, which ultimately did happen. It was sold to Hearst, another great company. And around that time, I was haunted by a nightmare, actually, not just a dream, that I had periodically ever since she had died. And it had intensified. And the gist of the dream, because it went on and on and on, was I would have this sudden realization that she was really alive. And I was ignoring her. And she was alone and sick. And I hadn't called her. And what's wrong with me? how could I have done this? And then I would go searching to try to call her, but I couldn't because I couldn't find her number. And this went on, and the searching and everything. And I realized that I was in a place where I had to look back if I was really going to move forward in my life, that there was something there that needed to be re-examined. And that kind of came together with the realization that I was the age she was when she first got sick. And that kicked everything off. I think I answered all parts of that question. Did I?
Yes, beautifully. Parent-child relationships are complicated, and we go through phases in our life, where in one phase our parents are immortal. They literally are the people that gave us life and created us, and because of that, there's an epic quality to the way we see our parents. They're larger than life. And then as we get older, I think as we see our own place in the world, those gilded thoughts of our parents turn to brass, and we start losing some of the luster. And then, God forbid, one day we realize that our parents are humans just like us. Mm-hmm. And then when we have this relationship with our own children, we see those things in them and then question, about what's it going to be like when my children realize that I'm only human. When you start processing through all of this stuff, and start to write about the relationship with you and your mother, how do you find the story thread in that? How do you encapsulate the time frame that you want to write about, and the emotional scale of going from the act of discovery and hopefully to some resolution? Mm-hmm.
Another big one, Hank.
No. This resonates with me so deeply. I lost my mother back in December, and I relate to you. There are things that you think about every day. There are unresolved things. There are happy memories. There are the ones where you still have questions that you never get answers to. So as you process through this, how do you start finding the thread?
So I think the process or the answer is not an easy one. And the reality, at least for me, was after I went through this period of reflection and getting at the truth, what was perceived and misperceived along the way. I knew that part of the story were secrets and illusions and those perceptions. And so with that in mind, I went on a kind of journey to know more and learn more about her, about the past, talking to some people who were still alive and who were important to me, and kind of reopening the door to a conversation. And in that process, I went 360 degrees. And the book, when I decided to write it, really documents that process. But the book changed dramatically as I was shaping it. So at first it started as a love letter to her. That was my intention. This is going to be a love letter to my mother. This is her legacy and all she meant to me. And the book is that. But when I started writing it, I realized, oh my God, it's about me. The story is me. And that it might sound naive. Maybe it sounds super naive to writers who have already completed books of their own. I even started it as fiction because I was disguising the story until a literary agent said, try memoir. And when I did that, I knew that was the path I had to go down. And then I realized the story's really not hers. It belongs to me for the first time. And then that really changed the tone of the book, the perspective, the window that I was looking through. And it made it all better because the first draft was just more of a tribute. What the readers are seeing now in the finished product is a raw, emotional story that acknowledges her flawed perfection, and just like as we're all flawed. And then by the end of the book, I realized that the messages, as I kind of unraveled and undid the myth of my mother, is really for my daughter's generation. So the short answer to your question is you really don't know sometimes at the beginning where it's all going to go. You just have to begin, and you have to get it out and down, because every single aspect about a book is in the editing and the finessing of it.
Well, the old adage is writing is rewriting. And,
sure.
That there's so many things in your answer that I want to ask you about. But, I'm glad that you said that you began as fiction, because I was going to ask you about that. A lot of times, as fiction writers, as, writers who write purely fiction, there's no escaping the fact that we as writers end up in our characters, in some way, some fashion. A lot of times it's greatly disguised, and, the characters that we as the writer relate to so much are not who the readers would expect us to say, or the pieces of us. But when you're writing something so deeply personal as your own relationship with your mother, and a mother that's so much larger than life as yours was, I would think that the initial temptation would be to couch that in fiction and story, so that you don't have to get so close to the bone, if you will. When you switched to memoir and kind of gave yourself permission to really get down to the truth, was that a liberating experience for you? And did the writing just completely change shape?
Two parts to that answer as well. When I was in fiction mode, I not only made it fiction, I put it in a whole another era. It was in the 18th century. So, I really went far. And there's a story today that came out on Thrive Global, because now I'm writing, now that the book is out, I'm writing essays around themes of the book. So writing is never over. And the essay that's on Thrive Global is basically how rule-breaking women from history helped me forgive my mother. And it talks about not necessarily the process of writing this book, but the idea to write the book, to say, okay, you've reflected, you know you need to go here, write about this, came while I was on a trip to London with my daughter. And I was in a room with remarkable women from the 18th century. And to the earlier point, since my mother never left me, I'm looking at them, these rule breakers of their time, who achieved when nothing was expected of them, and who did it because they were unconventional for their day. And I'm looking into their portraits and their eyes, and I'm thinking of my mother in their day, and bam, the idea hit out of the blue to learn more about those women and write about my mother. And it was like a thunderbolt, like a movie scene, like in The Godfather, when Michael Corleone sees Apollonia, and bam, that's it. And that's really what happened with the fiction side. And there is a historical novel that's not entirely done and needs more editing, but that's where I went first. And the second part of the answer is when that literary agent said, Memoir, I had already been through so much that I knew, just like the journalist, potential journalist or future journalist who was reading Brenda Starr, I knew the truth when I heard it. And she said that to me, and I had that same feeling, oh my God, that's it. And it became a standalone, totally different story, because that's the nature of memoir. Now this is the real story. And that's what all of this other circuitous twisting and turning and everything had led me to. But I needed to live that in order to get here and to have the perspective to actually write this story. Again, did I answer your question?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The book began as a love letter to your mother and as a love story about your mother. And, you said that it evolved as, in the writing and as you got in touch with your reality of the story. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of us do that at first, and then the problem with writing about people is that people are three-dimensional, and we, with all of the good that we have to take the bad. We have to take, all that person means in the world, all the decisions that they've made, all of the people that they touch and affect. As you started going through that and really deconstructing your story so that you could get it on paper, how did your feelings about your relationship with your mother change and evolve? And do you feel like you understand more about her now, going through this process?
Oh my gosh. Yes. I do. You use the word liberating in your last question, and nothing's entirely neat and tidy, but in so many ways I've liberated myself from something that was inside, a belief that might have been a misbelief. And in so doing, and just from the process of writing the book, I've transformed my life, what I do, who I serve, how I'm going to go forward, just through the idea of writing this book. And my daughter, who conceived that trip, and, I don't know, we wouldn't be talking today if I hadn't gone on that journey, gotten the idea, and then decided to write. You'd be talking to someone else, maybe not having as much fun as you are. So it was freeing. I did go 360 degrees. I don't want to put in any spoilers for people, but there was a moment when something that I held as unquestionably true for my entire life melted away. And it was an enormous turning point. And from the early readers who are now reaching out, there's two things that are most rewarding for me. One of the industry reviews, not the early author blurbs, but the industry reviews, which are terrifying, by the way. So this is a thrilling but a terrifying time. I'm totally exposed, and I'm half Sicilian, so being exposed in any way is not part of my makeup. But if you're gonna do it, do it.
You gotta do it.
It's out there now. But I think it was Booklist or Kirkus. One of them said the most affecting part of this memoir is how the author liberates herself while still remaining tender to her mother's memory. And when I read that, I'm almost going to cry now, but when I read that, it was like, oh my God, thank you. They got it. Because this is not Mommy Dearest at all. But it's resonating, I think, with the early readers because the essence of it is not Mommy Dearest. It's not a harrowing memoir. I was not chained to a radiator. I never did not eat. I never slept in my car. It has none of those hugely horrific and emotional wrenching pieces to it. It's none of that. It's a subtle story. With my mother, I lived in the gray of life. Is it me? Is it her? And that I've come to realize. I did not know this at the beginning, but that's what this book touches on. And I think that's why people put their own experience into it when they're reading it, because most of us live in the gray of life. And, again, I think I answered your question. Sometimes I get caught up in my own answers because I am half Italian. So that's the emotional. You can't see me, but I'm talking with my hands right now.
Me too. I do too. If you were to tie my hands to my chair, I would be mute. Yeah. Speaking of the gray of life, that's, another subtlety to being the kid in the gray of life is, when you have a mother or a parent that is full Technicolor.
Exactly.
Then everything outside of that person or, in the wake of that person is kind of gray and overlooked. And, I think that resonates on several different levels.
Could I borrow that Technicolor?
Absolutely.
I need to use that.
That's yours. That's
I have an
free to
event
take.
on April 9th. That's no one in all these conversations. No one has ever said that. And I actually see, I can feel that line has truth to it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to borrow it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's yours to take. The one thing about writing memoir is that it is your experience. This is my story about what happened to me and the people around me. And as we've seen in some memoirs, in the past, the people in the periphery are not always happy with us telling our story. And I think that's one reason why a lot of people choose to fictionalize stories, because it's easier on the people around. This is going to be sort of a hypothetical question because you are an only child, as you stated. But if you would have had sibling connections, would this have been a harder story to write?
I think not only sibling connections, but if my mother was alive, or my mother and father were alive. Unfortunately for me, fortunately for the book, no one is here. So I sort of have free reign. And I just did another essay, When the Daughter Holds the Pen, and it is exactly on this topic. And so I had to really think about two things I thought about while the whole time I was writing. The first, of course, was, would my mother be proud of this? Would she feel she was represented well? And that was critically important to me. And the second is, would I have written this if she were still alive? And the truth is, no, I wouldn't have, because I would still be in our story. It would still be there. It would still have a day-to-day quality about it. It would be changing. We would be changing. And maybe I would have written something, but it wouldn't have been this story. I'm certain.
Yes, I think for the story to really resonate and be true, I think you have to be free of those concerns, and sometimes that means that the story has to move, on after, after those people have passed on.
Some people can do it. There's a phenomenal writer, Andrea Jarrell, who wrote a memoir about her mother and father and their relationship and the impact on her. And it's called I'm the One Who Got Away. And it's won all kinds of awards. And both her parents are alive, and she talked to both of them. So I think, I don't want to discourage people that want to do this. I can only share my own experience, who my mother was to me. If she were still alive, the story would be shaped more by her than it would be by me. And so it wouldn't have worked for me, but there are examples where it has been done.
The book, Saturday's Child, is available everywhere now when you're hearing this. Deborah, this is a deeply emotional story, that I believe is going to affect people, on a very real level. When people finish the book and close it, what do you hope people take away from it?
I think one thing, it is an optimistic story. And I had to emerge from the shadow of this larger than life goddess. I was a little slow to emerge. It took me a while. I was a bit of a late bloomer. But some of the pain that was endured for me was strengthening. And I inhaled my mother and those aunts who took care of me, that balanced her and her ways. And when I see myself and what I was able to achieve on my own, whatever relative success I've had up until this point, is really because of it all. They're all in me. And my father too. My mother's story could never be told without my father. And he became more of a hero, a quiet hero in this story than I intended at the beginning. And I realize also how much in his own striving and his own creative side, I am a lot like him. And so I don't believe when people get to the last page that there's going to be any hand-wringing or emotional angst over, everything Deborah faced. Oh my, because it's not that at all. What I hope people take away is that the pain and the wounds that every single one of us carry can be turned into strengths that help you succeed. There's another article that's going to run somewhere soon, and the working title of it is, I had a narcissistic mother and it made me a success. And of course, it's an opposite POV from normal. And of course, because everyone's so easily offended in the times that we're living in, I started off by saying, of course, there's a downside to not being a priority or feeling fully loved. However, those traits that I developed because of her made me a success at work. And I just go into like the intuitive one that we were talking about before, how I'm on everybody's team at work. I'm like, I got picked, not in sports when I was in school, but at work, everybody wanted me on a team because I didn't have to lead. I love making other talented people shine. I love that. And you know what? That plays very well in an office. Because I was so used to, running around that little pedestal of hers with a string of flowers and all of that. And it's ingrained in me and I enjoy it. I enjoy helping other people. I enjoy figuring things out because I was always trying to figure her out. I sometimes am entertaining because I had to get her attention. Like all of these things made me a success at work. And so that's, for me, the outcome and what got reinforced for me personally through this process and what I hope readers take away.
Fantastic. We could do an entire show on the good things that come out of negative situations.
Sure.
Yeah, that's Deborah, if people are just learning about you and your work, is there a place where they can find out more, connect with you, follow along with news coming up about what's going on with you in the book?
Sure. There's a site called Deborah, DEBORAH, Burns, BURNS, author.com. You can see my mother on that site, and I have to make sure I update it daily because the events are lining up. There are about 30 book tour events right now.
Wow.
So not all big. I do a lot with libraries. I love libraries. Part of this creative journey, I created a program called Skirting the Rules, which was the first title for this book. The publisher wanted to change it. And I help women who are 50 plus reinvent, sometimes creatively, so that they live their best, most meaningful sequels. So I had started doing that at libraries when I was writing the book, and I continue to do that. And I realize how important libraries are to communities. So it's a great give back for me. So I have a lot of, smaller library events and then some bigger book tour events in New York City and LA and down south. So a combination, but everything is on that site. And I think Instagram, everybody's on Facebook. It's Deborah Burns Author on Facebook as well. But I sort of love Instagram more. I like the way it's structured. So on Instagram, I am Deborah_L_Burns. And I try to make it intriguing by posting a mix of pictures from the past that people really ask me for. They want to see more. So I love Instagram of the social platforms more. So that's how you can find me.
Excellent. We'll put links to all that in the show notes. The book is Saturday's Child. I highly recommend everyone go get a copy of the book. It's out everywhere now. Deborah, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Hank, it has been a pleasure. I love the sound of your voice. I love your questions. I love what you do and how you inspire and help other authors. And if there's anything I can ever do to promote your show or to come back, maybe there needs to be a panel one day about some of the topics, and there's more than one of us on the other end talking about one of those aspects you mentioned. But happy to help in any way. I thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
On Walpurgis night, when the moon is high, hell's bells ring and witches must answer. They dapple their breasts with rendered fat of murdered babes, straddle their brooms, and take to the sky, as the devil wills, to speed through dreamy midnight air to the summit of the Brockenberg, that haunted peak shrouded in swirling mists, where a glen of gnarled limbs and wan moonlight awaits to host their debauches and blasphemies. Now to the Brocken the witches ride. The stubble is gold and the corn is green. There shall the carnival's sabbat be seen, and the devil shall come to preside. The accuser elopes from the bowels of hell, a sure-footed, goat-headed, many-horned beast with cloven hooves and a staff of bone. He perches upon the witch altar to brood in cerulean half-light, a winged silhouette with watchful red eyes. The witches gather and bow to their master, upon his charred rump give the shameful kiss, then imps beat the drum and a round dance begins. Lash yourselves into frenzy, hags! Pass the chalice of pure marrow broth. Whip the ground with your hair, tread the sky with your feet, dance with joined hands around Satan's cold fire. Then find out a nook of nettles and moss, and lay with the rough-skinned beast of your choosing, suckling some rancid teat of desire. But hist! The cock crows. Away, away! Gather your tatters and broomsticks and wits, back to your huts, to your thresholds and hearths, and become once more, at the red break of day, the furtive adder in your neighbor's garden. The ghost host of the Salem Sorcery Tour, dazzling in his steampunk Victorian morning crepe, let the spell he'd woven trail through the twilight air like a hag across the moon, then chirped, "Isn't that silly?" and bowed, sweeping the wet grass with his satin-ribboned top hat. The tour group gave a polite round of applause. Nobody believes that stuff today, but the Puritans sure did. They took witches very seriously. If they went down in the morning and bought eggs, and one was rotten, surely the devil had come in the night, gone boop, tee-hee-hee, then scampered off on his little hooves. And who's in league with the devil? Witches. We're taught that the Puritans were super nice and cute with little buckles on their hats, but it's not the case, folks. They were fanatics. Witch hunts don't happen in a healthy society. They hated kids. They hated women. They were crazy. And that craziness. He turned on the spot, casting a protective circle around the stone garden of the witch memorial. Got these people killed.